The courtroom went completely silent. My father had been smiling just seconds earlier. Then I stood up, looked directly at him and opened the folder I had carried into court that morning. I stopped. My father's smile disappeared. His face went pale so quickly that even his attorney turned to look at him. Nobody in that courtroom knew what I was about to say. But my father did. At least he thought he did. And that was the moment I realized he had finally understood that the daughter he had spent years dismissing was no longer going to protect him from the consequences of his own choices. 3 months earlier, I had never imagined I would stand in a courtroom without a lawyer. My name is Claire Morgan. I was 29 years old, a captain in the U.S. Army, and until that year I had always believed my family was the one place where I could take off the uniform, put down the responsibilities, and simply be someone's daughter. I was wrong. The trouble began with a phone call from my father on a rainy Tuesday evening. "Come home this weekend," he said. "No hello. No how are you. Just an order." I was sitting at my kitchen table in my apartment outside Fort Meade, Maryland, going through paperwork when I heard his voice. "Why? Because we need to talk about the house." I knew exactly which house he meant. The old 2-story home in Virginia, where I had grown up. The house with the cracked stone steps, the oak tree my mother planted when Ethan was born, and the kitchen where she used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. "What about it?" I asked. "We're selling it." I stopped turning the pages in front of me. "You're selling Mom's house." "It isn't your house, Claire." His answer came so quickly that it hurt more than I expected. "I know that, Dad. I just thought you thought wrong." There was a long silence. Then he added, "Your brother has a business to run. He needs the money." Of course, Ethan. My older brother had always been the practical one in my father's eyes. The son who stayed close to home. The son who joined the family construction company. The son who could do no wrong. I had chosen the army. My father never quite forgave me for it. To him, military service was respectable, but not impressive enough to make him proud. When I was younger, he used to say, "You could have gone to business school." Later, when I became an officer, he would smile and say, "Well, at least you're getting a steady paycheck." That was his version of praise. I drove to Virginia that Friday. When I walked into the house, my mother's photographs were still on the hallway wall. Her favorite blue vase sat beside the kitchen window. For 1 second, everything felt normal. Then I saw the paperwork spread across the dining room table. My father sat at the head of it. Ethan was beside him. My mother sat quietly near the window. Richard pushed a document toward me. "Sign this." I looked down. "What is it?" "The sale authorization. I didn't touch it." "Why do you need my signature? Because your name is on some of the old property documents." I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," my father interrupted, "don't make this difficult." I slowly pulled the paper back toward him. "I want to read it first." He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was the same laugh I had heard whenever I asked too many questions as a teenager. "You've been gone too long. I've been in the army, Dad." "Exactly." He leaned back in his chair. "You come home twice a year, wear that uniform, and suddenly you think you understand everything." I felt something inside me tighten. "I never said that. You don't have to." Ethan smirked. My father continued. "Your brother has been here. He's worked for this family. He's kept the business alive. He deserves the money from the house. And what did Mom want?" The room went quiet. My father looked at me. "Don't bring your mother into this." "Why not? Because she's gone." Those 4 words landed harder than I expected. My mother had been dead for almost 2 years, but her absence still had weight in that house. I looked down at the documents again. Something didn't feel right. There were dates I didn't recognize, signatures I didn't remember, and one document appeared to show that I had authorized a transfer connected to the property. I stared at the page. "I didn't sign this." My father sighed. "Claire, I didn't. You probably forgot. I was deployed when this was dated." His expression changed for half a second. Then it disappeared. "You're mistaken." I looked at him. "No, I'm not." He stood. Enough. I had seen that expression before. It was the expression he used when he expected everyone else to stop talking. But I wasn't 16 anymore. I was an army officer who had spent years learning one simple lesson. When something doesn't add up, you don't ignore it because someone louder tells you to. You verify it. That night I went back to my hotel instead of staying at the house. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. "Claire, you need to check the county records before you sign anything. No name, no explanation, just one sentence." I stared at it for several minutes. Then I opened my laptop. And that's when I discovered that the house wasn't the real problem. There was money. A lot more money than my father had told me about. Money connected to my mother's estate. Money that, according to the documents I was reading, should have involved me. I sat alone in that hotel room until nearly 2 in the morning. I didn't call my father, I didn't call Ethan, I didn't accuse anyone. I simply started making a timeline, dates, documents, transfers, signatures, locations. And one fact kept coming back to me. Somebody had used my name on paperwork while I was thousands of miles away. The following Monday, I received another surprise. A formal notice from the court. My father was suing me. He claimed I had interfered with the family property and had acted without authorization. I read the first page twice. Then a third time. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. The man who had raised me had decided to make me the villain in a courtroom. And he believed I couldn't fight back. He was so confident that when we finally stood across from each other in court, he would laugh at me. He would look at my uniform, he would look at my empty table, and he would say the words that changed everything. "Can't your military pay even afford a lawyer?" What he didn't know was that by then I had already found something he never expected me to find. And that was why when the judge finally asked me to stand and speak for myself, I opened my folder, looked at my father and said the one word that made his face go white. The next morning I woke before sunrise, but I didn't feel rested. I had barely slept. My father's words kept circling through my head. "You come home twice a year. You don't understand this family. You probably forgot." I had heard versions of those sentences for most of my adult life, but now they felt different. Because this time they weren't just insults. They were part of a strategy. My father had decided that if he repeated something enough times, other people might eventually believe it too. I got dressed, made coffee, and drove on to base. For several hours I buried myself in work. That was one of the things the Army had taught me. When something in your personal life becomes overwhelming, you don't let it interfere with the mission in front of you. You focus, you document, you handle what you can. And you don't make decisions while you're angry. So I didn't call my father, I didn't call Ethan. Instead, during my lunch break, I opened the county property records again. The house had changed ownership several times over the years, but the records were public. I went through them slowly, one document, then another, then another. The more I read, the less sense it made. There was a transfer associated with my mother's estate. Then another transaction. Then a refinancing document. And attached to one of those documents was a signature that looked like mine. It was close enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention, but I knew my own signature. More importantly, I knew where I had been. The date on that document was 11 months after I had left Virginia for a lengthy overseas assignment. I pulled up an old email from my commanding officer. There it was, my travel date, my assignment location. The dates matched perfectly. I couldn't have been in Virginia. I couldn't have signed that document in person. I sat back in my chair. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that my father hadn't simply made a mistake. Someone had deliberately used my name. The thought made my stomach turn. I called my mother, not because she could answer, just because sometimes grief makes you do strange things. Her number was still saved in my phone. I listened to the automated message and hung up before leaving a voicemail. Then I whispered to the empty room, "Mom, what did they do?" That evening I drove back to my apartment. I opened a notebook and wrote 3 words across the top. Facts only. Underneath, I began building a timeline. My mother's death, the date of the estate paperwork, the date of the suspicious signature, the date of the property transfer, the date of the money movement, my military assignment, my travel records. Everything had to be separated from emotion. I wasn't going to accuse my family because something felt wrong. If I was going to stand against my father, I needed facts. 3 days later, I called him. He answered on the second ring. What now? I need copies of Mom's estate documents. You don't need them. I believe I do. Claire stopped digging. The words were quiet. That frightened me more than if he had yelled. Why? Because you're going to find things you don't understand. Then explain them. Silence. I waited. Finally, he said, You're making this into something it isn't. I found a document with my signature on it. His breathing changed. What document? I didn't answer. Claire, I'll send you the date. You don't know what you're looking at. Then help me understand. He hung up. I stared at the phone. That was the first time I knew for certain that I wasn't imagining things. If everything was innocent, my father would have explained. Instead, he had ended the conversation. The next day, I called my brother. Ethan answered while I was driving home. Hey, did Dad tell you about the estate? There was a pause. What about it? The money. What money? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because his answer told me something. You really don't know. Know what? I pulled my car into a parking lot and turned off the engine. I told him about the documents. He became quiet. Then he said Dad told me the house was basically his. Did he tell you Mom left anything? No. That answer stayed with me. Ethan had always been the favored son. But now I realized he might have been kept in the dark too. Ethan, did you ever sign anything about the house? No. Did Dad ever ask you to? No. Why? I took a breath. Because someone has been moving things around. He didn't respond immediately. Then he said, Claire, you know Dad. He handles everything. I know. And he wouldn't steal from us. I looked through my windshield at the darkening sky. I hope you're right. That night, Ethan called me back. His voice sounded different. He had found an old box in the office at the family business. Inside were copies of documents from my mother's estate. One envelope had my name written on it. But Ethan hadn't opened it. He asked if I wanted him to. Yes. There was a long silence while he opened it. Then he said, Claire. What? There are bank statements. How far back? About 3 years. My heart started beating faster. Read me the account holder. He hesitated. Then he said my mother's name. I closed my eyes. What's the balance? Another pause. Claire, there's more than $600,000 here. I didn't speak, neither did he. My mother had worked as a school counselor for most of her life. She wasn't wealthy, but she had been careful, she had saved, she had invested, and apparently she had left more behind than my father had ever told us. Where did it go? I asked. I don't know. Look at the last transactions. Paper rustled. Then Ethan stopped. There's a transfer. To where he read the name. It was connected to the family business. Not directly to my father, but close enough. Ethan, I said quietly, don't confront Dad yet. Why? Because we don't know enough. He exhaled. You sound like you're investigating a crime. No. I looked at the notebook beside me. I'm investigating my own family. That distinction mattered. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. I was looking for the truth. Over the next week, I requested every document I could legally access. Some arrived by email. Others came through public records. A few were copies Ethan found in the business office. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. And then I found something that made my hands go cold. A message from a former employee of my father's company. It had been buried in an old email account. The employee had written, Does Claire know about the account? My father's response was only one sentence. She doesn't need to. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. For years, I had thought my father underestimated me because he was stubborn. Now I understood. He hadn't simply underestimated me. He had counted on me being loyal. He had counted on me not asking questions. And he had never imagined that the daughter he dismissed as just a soldier would sit quietly, gather every document, and follow the money. I looked at the court notice sitting beside my notebook. My father's lawsuit suddenly made sense. He wasn't trying to win because he was confident. He was trying to move first. He wanted the courtroom to hear his version of the story before I had a chance to tell mine. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to fight my father with anger. I was going to fight him with facts. I thought having facts would make me feel safer. It didn't. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how carefully the truth had been buried. My father hadn't simply made one bad decision. There were layers, transfers, documents, conversations, and every layer seemed to lead back to the same question. What exactly had happened to my mother's money? I spent the next several evenings going through everything I had collected. I kept the original documents untouched and worked from copies. I created folders on my laptop and labeled them by date: estate, property, bank records, military records, court documents, correspondence. I even created a simple timeline on paper because I needed to see the entire story in front of me. At the top I wrote, "What do I know?" Underneath I listed only facts. My mother died in May. A transfer connected to her estate occurred several months later. A document containing my signature was dated during a period when I was serving overseas. More than $600,000 had existed in an account connected to my mother's estate. A significant portion had later been transferred to an account connected to my father's business. And my father had written, "She doesn't need to know." That last sentence bothered me more than anything else, because there were many innocent explanations for financial transactions. There were far fewer innocent explanations for hiding them. Still, I refused to jump to conclusions. That was one of the hardest things I had learned in the Army. A suspicion is not a fact. A fact is not automatically proof. And proof doesn't become stronger because you're angry. So I kept looking. One night around 2:13 a.m., I found an old email attachment I had completely forgotten about. It came from an address I recognized. Mark Ellison, my father's attorney. The attachment was a scanned letter from nearly a year earlier. I opened it. The first paragraph was ordinary. The second made my stomach tighten. Mark had warned my father that several estate documents should be reviewed because there were questions regarding authorization and signatures. He had specifically mentioned the possibility that one or more documents could be challenged if the dates were inconsistent with my location. I stared at the screen. Then I read it again. My father had been warned. Not recently. Not after my lawsuit. Months earlier. I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly the lawsuit looked different. Maybe my father hadn't sued me because he believed I had done something wrong. Maybe he had sued me because he knew I might eventually discover what had happened. I didn't sleep that night. At 4:30 in the morning, I opened my military travel records. I compared every questionable date against my official movements. One document said I had signed in Virginia on October 14th. My travel records showed I had been outside the United States. Another document listed a meeting I supposedly attended in person. I was on duty that day. Another signature appeared beside a date when I had been at a military installation on the other side of the world. I printed everything. Then I put the pages side by side. There it was. The timeline my father had never expected me to build. At 7:06 that morning, I called Ethan. He answered, sounding exhausted. "Claire, did you sleep?" "No, neither did I." There was a pause. "What did you find?" "I found an email from Dad's attorney." Ethan became quiet. "What did it say?" "That Dad was warned about the documents, warned about what the signatures." He didn't respond. "Ethan, I need to talk to you in person." We met that afternoon at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. Ethan looked different. Not physically, just uncertain. He placed a manila envelope on the table. I found more. I looked at him. "Where Dad's office?" "You went through his office." "I didn't break into anything. The company bookkeeper asked me to help organize old files." He pushed the envelope toward me. "I saw your name." Inside were copies of correspondence between my father and several financial institutions. Some were routine, others weren't. One letter referred to a transfer from my mother's estate into an account associated with Morgan Construction. Another discussed repayment. Another mentioned a deadline. Then Ethan showed me something that changed the way I saw him. A handwritten note from my mother. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a legal document. It was simply a note she had written to herself. She had listed several financial accounts, and beside one of them she had written for Claire and Ethan, equal shares. I swallowed hard. Did Dad know about this? Ethan nodded. I think so. You think he was the one who helped her organize the accounts? I looked down at the note. For years I had believed my mother trusted my father with everything because they were married. Now I wondered whether that trust had become a weakness. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Ethan looked embarrassed. Because I believed Dad. I didn't answer. I thought you were overreacting, he continued. When you said something was wrong, I thought you were angry because he wanted to sell the house. I was angry, I know. He rubbed his forehead. But I didn't think he would lie to us. Neither did I. That was the painful part. When someone outside your family betrays you, you can usually see the distance between you. When it's your father, the betrayal arrives carrying decades of memories with it. I looked at Ethan. Don't confront him yet. He frowned. Why not? Because if he knows what we have, he may start changing the story. You think he'd do that? I looked at the envelope. I don't know anymore. That evening I called Mark Ellison's office. I didn't accuse him of anything. I simply asked whether he could confirm the authenticity of the letter I had received. His assistant said he couldn't discuss a client's private matter. I thanked her and ended the call. That was enough. The letter was real. I now had 3 separate pieces of information that connected the timeline. My military records, the financial records, and the attorney's warning. But I still needed one thing. I needed to know who had actually authorized the transfers. That answer came 2 days later. A former employee of my father's company agreed to speak with me. We met in a quiet diner outside town. She was nervous. I shouldn't be telling you this. You don't have to tell me anything you're uncomfortable sharing. She looked down at her coffee. Your father told us that your mother wanted the money used to keep the business alive. Did you see anything in writing? No. Did my mother ever say that directly? No. Then why did everyone believe him? She gave me a sad smile. Because he was your father. Those words stayed with me. Because he was my father. That had been the answer to everything. Why I trusted him. Why Ethan trusted him. Why my mother trusted him. And why everyone assumed I would stay quiet. I drove home that night with the windows cracked open even though the air was cold. I wasn't crying. I wasn't furious. I was strangely calm. For the first time I understood the real battle. It wasn't about beating my father. It wasn't even about getting money back. It was about refusing to let a lie become the official version of my life. I looked at the court papers on the passenger seat. My father had accused me of interfering with the family property. He expected me to defend myself emotionally. Instead, I was going to show the court something much simpler. A timeline, a signature, a location, a transfer, an attorney's warning, and eventually the truth. I closed my eyes for a moment before starting the car. My father had always said I was too emotional, too stubborn, too loyal to the army. He had never realized that the army had taught me something far more important than discipline. It had taught me to remain calm when everyone else was trying to make me react. And now I was finally ready for court. The morning of the hearing I woke at 4:45. I didn't need an alarm. I had been awake for several minutes staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner. For the first time since my father filed the lawsuit, I wasn't wondering what he might do. I knew. He would tell the court that I had misunderstood the situation. He would say I was emotional. He would say I had been away from the family too long. He would say the documents were legitimate. And if necessary, he would let his attorney suggest that I was using my military position to make myself look more credible. What he didn't know was that I had spent the previous 3 weeks doing exactly what he had never expected me to do. I had stopped reacting. I had started documenting. I arrived at the courthouse a little after 8. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. People moved quietly between courtrooms carrying folders and talking in low voices. I saw my father before he saw me. He stood near the courtroom doors wearing a dark suit. Beside him was Mark Ellison, the attorney whose letter had warned him about the documents months earlier. Ethan was there too. He stood several feet away from them. When my father finally noticed me, his expression changed. His eyes moved from my face to the folder in my hand, then to my uniform. He gave a small smile. "You really came without a lawyer?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Claire, this can still be easy. Easy for whom?" He frowned. "You don't understand how serious this is. I understand exactly how serious it is." He lowered his voice. "You're making a mistake." I looked at him. "No, Dad." I paused. I think I made the mistake years ago." His smile disappeared. Before he could respond, the courtroom doors opened. We went inside. I took my place at the table. My father sat across from me with his attorney. The judge entered a few minutes later. Everyone stood. Then we sat. The clerk called the case. My father's attorney presented the opening argument. He spoke calmly and professionally. He described a family property dispute. He said my father had acted in good faith. He said there had been confusion regarding estate documents. He said I had interfered with a transaction involving the family home. Then he used a phrase I knew my father wanted the court to hear. Unfortunately, Ms. Morgan appears to have misunderstood the nature of the authorization. I kept my eyes on my notes. I didn't interrupt. When the attorney finished, the judge looked at me. "Ms. Morgan, you're representing yourself today." "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand that the court cannot provide you with legal advice." "Yes, Your Honor." "And you understand that you're responsible for presenting your own case?" "Yes." The judge nodded. "Proceed when you're ready." I stood. My legs felt steady, my hands did not. I placed the first document on the table. "Your Honor, I don't believe this case is as complicated as it appears." My father's attorney leaned back. I continued. "My father says I authorized a transfer connected to my mother's estate." I held up the document. "This document contains what appears to be my signature." My father nodded slightly. Then I placed another page beside it. "This is my military travel record for the same date." The courtroom became quieter. I was not in Virginia when this document was supposedly signed. His attorney stood. "Your Honor, we object to the relevance of military travel records without proper foundation." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Morgan?" I took a breath. "I understand, Your Honor. I have supporting records documenting the dates and locations, and I am prepared to provide them according to the court's requirements." The judge considered it. "Continue." I nodded. I moved to the second document. This one is dated 6 months later, then another, and this one. Each document told the same story. The signatures appeared to belong to me. The dates placed me somewhere else. My father sat perfectly still. His attorney stopped taking notes. I looked toward the judge. "I am not asking the court to accept my word simply because I'm a military officer." I paused. "I am asking the court to look at the records." That sentence changed something. I could feel it. This wasn't about who sounded more convincing anymore. It was about what the documents actually showed. I continued. "There is also a financial issue." My father's attorney immediately objected. "Your Honor, this goes beyond the scope of the present matter." The judge looked at the case file. "I'll allow limited discussion if it directly relates to the disputed authorization." "Thank you." I opened the next folder. "These are records connected to my mother's estate." My father's shoulders moved slightly. I saw it. The smallest reaction, but I saw it. I continued. "According to the records, there was an account containing approximately $600,000. My father looked down. That money was later transferred to an account associated with Morgan Construction. His attorney stood again. "Objection." The judge raised a hand. "On what basis, Your Honor, these financial records require authentication?" I nodded. "I understand." Then I reached for another document. This is why I believe the records need to be reviewed. I handed the document forward. It was the letter from Mark Ellison. The courtroom went silent. My father's attorney stared at the page. Then he looked at my father. For the first time that morning, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Not anger, not irritation. Fear. The judge read the document carefully. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "is this your letter?" The attorney hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor." "And did you write it to Mr. Morgan?" "Yes." "Does it accurately reflect your concerns at that time?" He looked toward my father, then back at the judge. "Yes." My father shifted in his chair. I could hear my own heartbeat. But I wasn't finished. I turned toward him. "Dad." He looked at me. "I didn't come here to destroy you." His jaw tightened. "I came here because you accused me of something I didn't do." He said nothing. "I would have listened if you had told me the truth." "Still nothing." "You could have called me." My voice softened. "You could have explained the documents." I looked down at the papers between us. "You could have told me what happened to Mom's money." My father's eyes dropped. I took one slow breath. Then I opened the final folder. There was one document inside. I placed it on the table. "Your Honor, there's one more thing." My father saw it. His face changed immediately. His attorney leaned toward him. "What is that?" My father whispered something I couldn't hear. The judge looked at me. "What does this document establish, Ms. Morgan?" I looked at my father. For years I had wanted him to understand that I wasn't weak, but standing there I realized something more important. I didn't need him to think I was strong. I needed the truth to stand on its own. I turned back toward the judge. "This document shows that my father was warned about the disputed documents before he filed this case." My father's face had gone completely pale, and for the first time that morning, nobody was laughing. For several seconds, nobody moved. The document lay on the table between me and the judge. My father stared at it as if looking at something that had suddenly become dangerous. The judge lifted her eyes. "Mr. Morgan, I need an explanation." My father swallowed. "Your Honor, that letter has been taken out of context." His attorney leaned toward him. "Richard, let me handle no." My father stopped him. He looked at the judge. "I can explain." I sat down. For the first time since the hearing began, I wasn't the person standing under pressure. My father was. He began speaking carefully. I was concerned about the estate. There were questions about the paperwork. I was trying to protect the family business. The judge looked at him. Protect it from what he hesitated. Financial instability. I almost closed my eyes. That was the explanation he had been giving himself for months, maybe even years. He hadn't stolen from his children. He had protected the family. He hadn't hidden information. He had prevented unnecessary worry. He hadn't accused his daughter to save himself. He had simply done what he thought was necessary. But explanations don't change documents. I raised my hand slightly. The judge looked at me. "Ms. Morgan, I have one question for my father, Your Honor. You may ask." I turned toward him. "Did you know that I was overseas when that document was supposedly signed?" He looked at me. "Yes." The courtroom became still. His attorney immediately leaned toward him. "Richard." But my father continued. I knew you were away. Then why did you tell the court I authorized it?" He looked down. "I believed you had given someone permission." "Who?" Silence. "Who did I give permission to?" "I don't know." I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, that's the problem." My father's attorney stood. "Objection. Counsel." The judge interrupted him. "She is representing herself. Continue." I turned back to my father. "Did you ever ask me?" "No." "Did I ever tell you I authorized anyone?" "No." "Did you have written authorization from me?" He didn't answer. I waited. Finally he said, "No." That single word felt heavier than anything else that had happened that morning, because it was the first time he had admitted it. I looked down at my hands. I wasn't celebrating. There was nothing satisfying about hearing my father admit that. It hurt, Because behind every document was a memory, behind every lie was a relationship, and behind every dollar was my mother's trust. I took out another set of records. These show that money from my mother's estate was transferred into an account connected to Morgan Construction. My father shook his head. That money kept the company alive. Ethan suddenly spoke from the back of the courtroom. Dad. Everyone turned. He stood slowly. You told me that money was from the sale of equipment. My father looked at him. Ethan's voice cracked. Was that a lie too? My father didn't answer. I watched my brother's face. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked hurt. And somehow that was worse. The judge asked Ethan to remain silent unless called upon, but the moment had already changed the room. This was no longer simply a dispute between a father and daughter. It was a family discovering that they had each been given different versions of the same story. My father finally spoke. I was trying to save the company. Ethan shook his head. You could have told us. My father looked at him. I thought you wouldn't understand. Ethan laughed bitterly. You never gave me the chance. My throat tightened, because I knew exactly what he meant. My father had spent years making decisions for everyone and calling it protection. Then when anyone questioned him, he called it disrespect. The judge reviewed the documents again. Mr. Morgan, I strongly recommend that all parties obtain appropriate legal and financial advice regarding the estate and the business records before proceeding further. My father nodded, but I could tell he wasn't listening to the judge anymore. He was looking at me. His expression had changed. There was something almost childlike in his face. Fear, regret, maybe shame. He whispered Claire. I didn't respond immediately. What I never thought you'd find all this. The words were so quiet that only those closest to us could hear. I looked at him. That was never the part that hurt. He stared at me. What hurt was that you thought I wouldn't care enough to look. He lowered his eyes. The judge called for a recess. Everyone stood. My father's attorney gathered the documents. Ethan walked toward me. He looked exhausted. I didn't know he said. I know. I should have asked more questions. You weren't the one who filed the lawsuit, but I believed him. I nodded. So did I. Ethan looked at the courtroom doors. What happens now, I don't know. That was the honest answer. The truth had been exposed, but truth didn't magically repair everything. There would still be financial reviews. There would still be attorneys. There would still be questions about the estate, the transfers, and the documents. There might be consequences for decisions my father had made. And I knew better than to pretend that one courtroom hearing could solve all of it. Outside the courtroom, my father was waiting. His attorney had already walked away to make a phone call. For once, my father was alone. He looked at me. Can we talk? I nodded. We sat on a bench near the courthouse entrance. For nearly a minute, neither of us said anything. Finally, he spoke. I was scared. I looked at him. Of what? Losing the company. I waited. And losing control. That admission surprised me. He rubbed his hands together. I built that company from nothing. Your grandfather helped me with the first truck. I spent 40 years keeping it alive. I know. When your mother died, I couldn't think straight. His voice became quieter. I thought if I kept everything together, everyone would be okay. I looked at him. Dad, keeping a family together doesn't mean deciding what everyone is allowed to know. He nodded. I know that now. I wasn't sure he did. But for the first time, he was listening. I should have told you about the money, he said. Yes, I should have told Ethan. Yes. I shouldn't have filed against you. I looked down. No, you shouldn't have. He took a breath. I'm sorry. The words didn't erase anything. They didn't restore the money. They didn't erase the court records. They didn't give me back the years when I had believed my father saw me as less capable because I had chosen the army. But they mattered. Because sometimes an apology isn't the end of a wound. It's simply the first honest thing placed over it. I stood. I don't know if we're going to be okay. He nodded. I understand. But I don't want revenge. He looked surprised. I continued. I want accountability. There's a difference. For the first time that day, my father looked directly into my eyes. I know. I walked back toward the courthouse doors. Behind me, I heard him say my name. Claire. I turned. He hesitated. Then he said the words I had waited years to hear. I am proud of you. My eyes filled with tears. I didn't smile. I didn't run back into his arms. I simply nodded. Thank you, Dad. And then I walked away. Not because I had stopped loving my father, but because I had finally learned that loving someone does not require you to protect them from the truth. 3 months passed after the hearing. A lot happened during those 3 months, but none of it happened quickly. That was probably the hardest lesson for me. I had spent weeks believing that once the truth came out, everything would suddenly make sense. It didn't. The court ordered further review of the estate records and the disputed documents. Financial professionals were brought in to trace the transfers. My father's attorney handled the legal process from his side, and I finally accepted professional legal advice of my own. That decision mattered to me. I had represented myself because I wanted my voice heard, but I learned something important through the process. Being strong doesn't mean refusing help. Sometimes being strong means knowing when you need someone with more experience beside you. The financial review confirmed what the documents had suggested. Money from my mother's estate had been transferred into the family business. Some of it had been used to cover legitimate business expenses. Some of it had been moved without the proper documentation. And the paperwork claiming I had authorized certain transactions was not supported by reliable evidence. There was no dramatic movie-style arrest, no judge screaming at my father, no handcuffs. Real life rarely gives you that kind of clean ending. Instead, there were meetings, documents, accountants, attorneys, deadlines, corrections, and difficult conversations. My father eventually agreed to cooperate fully with the review. The family property was no longer treated as something he could simply decide to sell. The estate was properly accounted for. The money that belonged to my mother's heirs was separated from the company's finances. Ethan also made a decision I never expected. He stepped back from the family business for several months. He told my father that he couldn't continue working there until everything was transparent. At first, Dad took it as another betrayal. Then slowly he understood. My brother wasn't abandoning him. He was setting a boundary. That was something none of us had been very good at before. A few weeks later, I received a text from my father. "Can I come see you?" I stared at the message. My first instinct was to ignore it. Not because I hated him, because I was tired. Tired of courtrooms, tired of documents, tired of defending myself against someone who was supposed to know me better than anyone. But eventually I replied, "Yes." Saturday afternoon. He arrived at my apartment carrying a small cardboard box. I opened the door. He looked older. Not dramatically, just older in a way I hadn't noticed before. His shoulders were slightly lower, his hair had more gray, and for once he wasn't carrying a folder. "What's in the box?" I asked. He held it out. "Your mother's things." I took it carefully. Inside were photographs, letters, a recipe book, and an old army photograph of me from years earlier. I smiled despite myself. "I thought you hated this picture." He shook his head. "I never hated it." I looked at him. "You told me I looked like I was trying too hard." He smiled faintly. "I was an idiot." I laughed softly. It was the first time we'd laughed together in months. We sat at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "That loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from the truth." I looked down at my coffee. He continued, "I spent my whole life thinking that if I controlled everything, I could keep everyone safe. And did it work?" He gave a tired smile. "No, I waited. It nearly destroyed my family." There was no excuse in his voice, no defense, just regret. "I was afraid," he said. "After your mother died, I didn't know how to keep the business going. I thought if the company failed, everything your mother and I built would disappear. I understand being afraid." "I know, but you made decisions for everyone." He nodded. I did. And when I questioned you, you treated me like I was a child. He looked at me. I thought you were too young to understand what was happening. I smiled sadly. I was in the army, I know. I was an officer, I know. And somehow you still thought I couldn't handle the truth. He looked down. That was my mistake. I let the silence sit between us. I wanted to forgive him. But I had learned not to confuse forgiveness with pretending. There would always be a part of me that remembered standing alone in that courtroom. There would always be a part of me that remembered hearing my father laugh. But there was also a part of me that remembered him sitting across from me now, finally telling the truth. I don't want to spend the rest of my life being angry, I said. He looked up. Neither do I. So if we're going to have a relationship again, it has to be different. He nodded. No more secrets. No more making decisions for each other. No more using money as a weapon. He took a breath. Agreed. I reached across the table, not for a dramatic embrace, just for his hand. He held it. That was enough. A few months later, I returned to Virginia. The house was still standing. The oak tree my mother planted had grown wider. Ethan was there too. We spent the afternoon cleaning out old boxes. At one point, Ethan found a photograph of the three of us from when we were children. He held it up. Look at Dad's hair. I laughed. Oh my God. My father walked into the room. What Ethan showed him the photograph. Dad groaned. You two are enjoying this way too much. For a moment it felt normal. Not perfect, just normal. And I realized that maybe reconciliation wasn't about going back to the family we used to be. Maybe it was about becoming a healthier family than we had ever been. That experience also changed the way I handled my own finances. I created a complete estate file. I reviewed my beneficiaries. I kept copies of important documents. I made sure people I trusted knew where essential information was located. And I learned something I wish someone had taught me years earlier. You can love your family deeply and still protect yourself financially. Trust is valuable, but informed trust is stronger. If you're over 35, you probably have something worth protecting. A home, a retirement account, a business, an inheritance, a life insurance policy, maybe aging parents, maybe adult children, maybe a second marriage. Whatever it is, don't assume that everyone understands the same plan. Talk about it, write it down, review it. And when something involves significant money or legal rights, get qualified professional advice. That isn't distrust, that's responsibility. As for my father, our relationship didn't become perfect overnight. Sometimes he still tried to take control. Sometimes I still became defensive. But now we talked. And when we disagreed, we stopped pretending the disagreement didn't exist. One evening, months after the lawsuit, my father called me. Claire. Yeah, I was thinking about something. What? He paused. Remember when I asked if your military pay could afford a lawyer? I smiled. I remember. I shouldn't have said that. No, I was trying to make you feel small. I was quiet. Then I said, you don't have to make me feel small anymore, Dad. He laughed softly. I know. And that was the real ending. Not my father losing. Not me winning. Not money. Not a courtroom. It was the moment when we finally understood that dignity doesn't come from how much money you have, what title you carry, or whether someone believes in you. Sometimes dignity is simply refusing to lie about who you are. My father once laughed because he thought I couldn't afford a lawyer. He never understood that the most important thing I brought into that courtroom wasn't money. It was the courage to tell the truth. And sometimes the strongest form of justice isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's making sure their actions can no longer control the person you become. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, take a moment tonight to think about what you may need to protect, what conversation you may need to have, or what truth you've been avoiding. And if you believe someone else could use that reminder, share this story with them. You never know whose life might change because they heard it at the right moment. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, protect what matters, and never be ashamed to ask for help when the stakes are high. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes justice looks like truth, boundaries, and the courage to begin again.